The silence during the drive was consuming the attention of the couple in the vehicle. Ray Thompson gazed ahead, lost in his private thoughts. Surreptitiously, he would allow an occasional peripheral view at his wife, Marilyn. She was concentrating on looking out the passenger side window at whatever caught her interest. Whenever she thought it was safe, she would focus on the hazy, reflected image of her husband from the passenger's window as the miles continued to pass away. Subconsciously, as only married couples could do, little signals known only to Ray and Marilyn would tip off each other when one would decide to gaze at the other. That allowed the other to divert their attention and preclude the couple from the admission of observing their respective spouse. This well-established practice had been ongoing in the Thompson household for a long time. Communications between the two had devolved into formal, polite snippets of any topic that needed to be addressed. "We are so goddamn cordial," Ray Thompson thought as he allowed his vision to linger on Marilyn, dressed in her black dress, wearing dark silk stockings, her legs crossed at the ankles. Ladylike, her profile was mostly of her posterior as she continued to turn away from her husband. Her raven dark hair nearly matched her dress as Ray looked abjectly at her cheek, her jawline, a faint glimmering of her lips. These were the only portions of her head subject to his view. But her body, that exquisite feminine body that attracted him in college, was still amazing to him. No matter, he had committed to memory every inch of her body by vision and by touch. Hell, it went further than that. He had tasted every portion of her and breathed in her scent for the 9 years of their marriage. He honestly believed that if you blindfolded him and just allowed him to place his head on her torso, he could pick her out from her heartbeat, her breathing pattern, her scent, the texture of her skin. Ray felt the guilt of cheating for his thoughts of Marilyn. How can I even be thinking about her right now? Hadn't she made it plain by her words and her actions where I stood in the great scheme of things? It was just something else to mourn now. Another loss, another heartache, another numbing pain of a void that couldn't be filled. These were feelings that Ray had to entertain for too long a time now. What has it been? 62 months. 62 months of living in agony every day. He kept a daily tally. This made day number 1,865 of his personal hell. Would the events now come to a speedy conclusion? Would he get closure regardless how painful? Would he ever feel like breathing again? Marilyn Thompson sensed that her husband's attention diverted away from her. She took a quick glance at the hazy reflection in the glass for confirmation, and now she began to study the man she had committed herself to so many years ago. Her emotions were in flux. There were so many good things to remember, and there were too many bad things to forget. Why won't he give me the support I need? She thought. Why did I ever have to go looking to get such a basic human need? Then, her conscience weighed in and asked if she had provided that same need to her husband. In irritation at the self-examination, Marilyn focused on the sad stoic visage of Ray's face. She knew the torment he was undergoing was matched by hers. She wanted to gather the courage to initiate a dialogue, but every time she had attempted in the past year, she had been rebuffed. And every time Ray had clumsily tried to discuss things with her, she had retaliated and closed him off. Now the relationship consisted of only inane, insignificant conversations, cold politeness, and guilty consciousness. It hadn't started that way. Once there had been such a blinding love between the two. Once there had been the bond of two people into the bliss of a single entity of happiness. They were one and the same, even before they underwent the rite of marriage. Neither could endure the pain of being separated from each other. When they looked into each other's eyes while they exchanged their wedding vows, both thought they could never exceed the love they had for one another from that day forth. They were wrong. 14 months into the marriage, on Christmas Day saw the arrival of Rachel Lee Thompson into their lives. Now, both knew that life would never be the same, and they felt the completion of their souls into a cherished trinity. Marilyn remembered the stunned look of awe on Ray's face as he first glanced at his daughter in the delivery room. Then his face morphed into the sweetest look of adoration as he looked at Marilyn, exhausted from the efforts to give birth, first cradled the mewling newborn in her arms and began crying tears of joy. That caused him to join into the cascade of tears as the three huddled together briefly before the delivery team took charge of the post-delivery procedures. That began Marilyn and Ray's journey to become the perfect parents. They bought and read every book on child rearing. They scanned every night on the internet. They talked to every friend and family member they could. The anxiety they went through was endearing as well as exhausting. Finally, they compromised on trusting the most practical authorities, their mothers. From almost hourly calls, the two grandmothers were able to alleviate the fears and concerns of the new parents and at the same time began the process of spoiling their beautiful little granddaughter. Marilyn's parents were so enamored by their granddaughter that they moved cross-country to live nearby. So life began in the Thompson household, and each day was a wonder of discovery with their child. The feedings, the sleep cycles, the diaper changes, the quiet rockings at 2 a.m. to hush the baby with a soft lullaby, the rapt attention of watching the baby prone on their living room floor as she struggled to get on all fours, the increase in height and weight, the doctor's visits and vaccinations, the photographs of the baby using every gift bestowed at the baby showers and copies sent along with the thank you notes to the donors to show the appreciation of the gifts, the video recordings of each landmark event, the steady coordination of hands and eyes and muscle control, the blessed look of recognizing her parents' faces and voices when they came into her view and beaming a smile and the little body thrashing about, the first crawl, the first sounds, the first gripping of fingers, baby foods and spill-proof bottles. The first time she said, "Mama," which brought tears to Marilyn and Ray, standing up and then plopping back down on her bum, each day bringing a little more progress and endurance. Then that first hesitant step. Soon, they would keep a distance away to encourage Rachel to walk to them. The celebrations of each successful trek, the agony of teething, the increase in vocabulary, and the pleasure of trying to interpret Rachel's desires. The terrible twos era and potty training. The purchases of new outfits to accommodate Rachel's growth. The third and fourth birthday celebrations with a gleeful Rachel's face smeared with chocolate cake. All these and the thousands of others things that impacted their lives, just as they do every set of parents. And like every set of parents, Marilyn and Ray were sure that their child was the smartest and most beautiful baby ever born. Because everybody wants their child to be special, unique. And Rachel Lee Thompson was unique. She had something that tens of millions of babies would never have. Leukemia. Marilyn recalled the devastation she had felt when she and Ray sat in their pediatrician's office as the doctor tried to balance his concerns and assurances to the couple. There were a few disturbing results on Rachel's latest examination. Nothing major, just some things that warranted running some tests, then another consultation, and an even more concerned look on the doctor's face. More tests, more disturbing results, then the vagueness of a referral to an oncologist, and the zombie-like reaction of Marilyn and Ray walking out of the pediatrician's office with Rachel walking between them, holding both their hands, oblivious to the shadow of the events. The initial consultation with the oncologist, more tests, more dread. Then came the pronouncement of that awful word, cancer. The oncologist's pronouncement was like a judge handing down a death sentence. Marilyn became hysterical in the office, and Ray wasn't far behind. The seasoned oncologist had seen it all too many times before and used his experience to assure Marilyn and Ray. He cited the advancement in treatments, the specifics targeting of cells, the increase in survival rates. Rachel would receive the best care to be offered. He emphasized that he and his staff of doctors and nurses would leave no stone unturned in treating Rachel. They would all unite and battle this insidious disease. Still, after they left the office and sat with Rachel in her bedroom, both of them holding her and crying. And poor little Rachel sat there on the bed smothered by her parents, wondering why her parents were crying. The unknown fear, in turn, caused Rachel to cry, which cycled into even more crying by her parents. Marilyn began shedding tears again in the vehicle. She brought out a tissue from her purse to wipe her eyes without fumbling for one. After 5 years of practice, she had enough experience not to waste any time or motion in grasping one. The motion caught Ray's attention, and he wondered again if he should try to comfort his wife. But now, Marilyn had found her comfort elsewhere, he thought glumly. And in truth, so had he. He though back through time, looking once again in the chain of events that had got them to this point. He remembered how they had sat and talked and rehearsed how they would broach the subject with Rachel. He remembered how Marilyn so calmly began telling Rachel that she was sick and that they would have to go see a lot of doctors and hospital visits before Rachel got better. Ray was a quivering mass of emotional jello, but taking his cue from Marilyn, he began assuring Rachel that she would be okay. Her mommy and daddy wouldn't let anything bad happen to her. God, what a lie that turned out to be. All the medications, all the shots, all the chemo, that chemo. Watching Rachel bravely endure it all, trusting in blind faith that her parents wouldn't do this to hurt her. His poor baby coming home from a treatment and not having any appetite. The heartache of holding a wastebasket by his baby's bedside while she vomited and retched into it. The pallor of her complexion as she wasted away. Her hair, that shiny black hair that she had inherited from Marilyn, falling away in clumps from her scalp. He remembered how upset Marilyn and Rachel had been when they decided it was time to shave Rachel's head. He told them to hold off until he got back. He drove until he found the first available barber shop. He went in and requested that they shave his head. He felt weird coming out of the barber shop, the tingly sensation of the air breezing on his bald scalp, the curious looks of people seeing the pale white scalp clashing against his tanned face. When Marilyn and Rachel saw him, they were in shock, and the amazement morphed into laughter as first Rachel and then Marilyn insisted on feeling his head. He relished the soft caresses of Rachel as she asked if it hurt to have his head shaved. He told her it didn't hurt a bit, and that eased some of the concern from Rachel. Then he saw the pure look of gratitude on Marilyn's face at his sacrifice. The vehicle stopped at a red light and Ray's musings were interrupted. It had been a long time since he had seen a similar look on Marilyn's face. By coincidence, Marilyn at that same moment was recalling Ray's haircut. He had done that to help her baby. But then, Ray had always been there for Rachel, and for her as well. It had only been his quiet courage that emboldened her to do what she did. She made an emergency appointment at her hair salon and walked in and told Antoine what she wanted done. For close to 20 minutes, Antoine begged her to reconsider, but her mind was made up. She finally explained why she wanted it done, and with tears in his eyes, Antoine agreed, and soon she was startled at the large mirror showing her bald face. The other stylists and their customers were also crying since the story had been relayed from station to station. Antoine gave her a hug as she left to go pay for his services. She was stopped at every station as the other stylists insisted on hugging her as well. Even some of the other customers insisted on hugging her. When she finally got to the counter to pay, she was informed that Antoine had told them not to accept payment from Marilyn. Marilyn was insistent on paying, but Antoine was adamant that Marilyn did not owe for the service. Marilyn felt humbled by the act of sympathy from Antoine and the others as she walked out of the salon. As she walked through the parking lot, she heard some loud guffaws coming from a group of teenagers pointing toward her. She just braced herself from their ignorant ridicule and reminded herself what was important: the show of solidarity with her husband and her daughter. Her husband's act had brought laughter. Hers had brought tears as Rachel realized she wouldn't be going through the ordeal alone. As Ray hugged her, he whispered, "Oh, baby." As his hands explored his wife's shaved scalp, she whispered back, "It's okay. It will grow back." Then she smiled and told him, "It just means you are going to have to buy me and Rachel all the Hermes scarves we want as our hair grows back." And bless his heart, he did exactly that. Each day, he would bring home 2 boxes. A scarf for both of the women he cherished, and Marilyn and Rachel would model and trade scarves on a daily basis. The times that Rachel felt well enough, they would go out in public, not heeding the looks they drew. They were united in their love. At least, that was how they started. Ray and Marilyn knew from the outset that Rachel's disease had increased the level of stress in their lives. Every night, in bed, they talked on how to deal with the daily situation as they held each other. Sometimes, they would end the conversations making love into the night. Sometimes, they would just hold each other silently until sleep overtook them. Each day, they would go to work, and the first order of business was to relate the news of Rachel to their coworkers. Marilyn was employed as a graphic artist in a mid-sized business firm that employed about 50 people. Every morning after she finished relating the events of Rachel, her coworkers would always remind her to call them if she needed anything. She always responded that she would, but she never figured she would do so. She had a strong support group of coworkers, family, friends, and neighbors she relied on. While she appreciated the offers, she never quite let people know what she was really feeling. She would allow herself to be the center of attention and allow people to fawn over her. but no one grasped her really. How could they? Unless they were in the same situation. She quietly did her job and went home and relieved her mother or mother-in-law from babysitting duty. Ray was the youngest associate in a law firm. While the partners were sympathetic to his plight, the bottom line was Ray was expected to produce for the firm. As long as he produced billable hours, the partners would be happy. Ray relied on his secretary, Karen, to keep him on the straight and narrow. So every morning, she would bring him a cup of coffee and asked him how he was doing. He would spend a few minutes with her sharing personal time until his calls and appointments came in. And that, in a nutshell, was how the Thompsons managed to get through from day to day on the emotional roller coaster of their lives. Often, the daily routine was interrupted by a particular procedure that Rachel would undergo, and both would drop everything to tend to their daughter. Then, they would go back to their employment to frantically mend fences and play catch-up. Time has a way of eroding everything. And unknowingly, minute by minute, time was eroding away at Ray and Marilyn's marriage. It was so minute that neither was aware there was a problem as they began to drift away from one another. They continued to be there for Rachel every minute they could. They delegated errands and chores between them in whatever fashion would be to Rachel's benefit. Getting Rachel well was the main priority in their lives. The strain of stress subtly began to throw grains of irritation into their relationship as they silently continued to strive to get Rachel healthy. Still, they labored from day to day. The priority was Rachel. As long as Rachel was on the mend and happy, then Ray and Marilyn were likewise. The good days brought false hopes. The bad days were minimized in significance. Still, stress and time grew the grains of irritation into resentments. First, there was a procedure that Ray could not attend due to a conflict with an appointment. Marilyn fumed at him as she waited at the hospital alone in the bland reception room. Then he came rushing in with an anxious look on his face, asking her how Rachel was doing. She brusquely responded that she hadn't been given any news yet. The harshness of her tone made Ray step back from any more questions as he meekly sat by her and waited together. When they got home, she apologized and they made up for the argument in a mutually satisfying manner in bed. But little by little, there were other little slip-ups which brought out one or the other to lash out. And soon the make-up sex was slowly dwindling away. Ray found himself every morning venting to his secretary, Karen Ferguson. "I swear, Karen, it is like I can't do anything without her finding fault in whatever I do." Karen gave an encouraging, emphatic gesture for Ray to continue. Marilyn got upset that we made the doctor's appointment with only 10 minutes to spare. When the hell have you ever gone to a doctor's appointment and got taken at the appointed time? Never. Am I right? Ray continued to pace around his office as Karen continued to track her attention on him. So, of course, we wait half an hour before we even get taken back to the exam room. Then as soon as Rachel gets out of earshot, she unloads on me. I mean, I got enough on my plate. I don't need to have this crap going on. Karen soothingly interjected, "Mr. Thompson, you just need to sit down and talk to your wife. You have too much invested to let things get away from you. Just take some time and explain that you are doing the best you can and that you know she is doing the best she can," Karen interjected. "I hear you, Karen, and I'm trying. I'm trying really hard, but some days it just gets the best of me, you know?" Ray sighed. "Well, thanks for letting me blow off some steam and vent. I guess we better get prepped on the Jones contract now." "You're welcome, Mr. Thompson. Anytime you feel the need to talk, just buzz for me." Ray watched the attractive secretary walk out of his office. "I'm lucky to have such a sensible secretary working for me," he thought. "Lord, I dread the day she comes in and tells me she is going to quit to get married. As good-looking as she is, she's got to have plenty of offers. Maybe I need to give her a big raise to keep her from leaving." Across town, an obvious upset Marilyn furiously worked on her latest project. Her supervisor, John Tullos, quietly walked over to her cubicle and studied her computer screen. Marilyn felt discombobulated by the close scrutiny as she continued to work through her problem. After a minute of studying Marilyn's monitor, John Tullos reached over and deleted her project. "What the hell, John?" Marilyn protested. She was frustrated that an entire week of her work had been sent arbitrarily down the drain. "My office, Marilyn." John began walking away from Marilyn, and her neighboring co-workers found reasons not to look at John walking to his office or a flustered Marilyn preparing to follow him. As she entered, he ordered her to close the door and sit down. She complied and now nervously awaited why she had been summoned. "Marilyn, I realize you are undergoing a lot of stress right now. The problem is that it is starting to impact on your work. It didn't take me 30 seconds to see that you totally had the parameters all wrong on your project. You've apparently been missing it for a week." Marilyn was flustered from John's revelation. She started to stammer an apology. John held up his hand. "It's okay, Marilyn. We got plenty of time to correct and get the project in the allotted time frame. What I'm worried about is you. You are the best person I got out on the floor, and when you suffer, we all suffer. As I said, I know that things are tough for you. Tell me what I can do to help. Do you need time off? Would you like to take a sabbatical? Do I need to assign you an assistant? What do you need, Marilyn? Talk to me." Marilyn stared at the floor. "John, I'm sorry I messed up. I got so much going on right now. The doctors are talking about replacing bone marrow, and we are in the process of looking for suitable donors, and all I can think about is that it is just going to mean more pain for my baby. Ray is going to be the first donor, and the other day I got pissed off at him because I thought we were going to be late getting to the doctor and I chewed him out. My husband is trying to save my daughter's life, and all I can do is pick a fight with him." Marilyn paused as she fought to regain control of her emotions. "I need to work, John. We have to have the medical coverage for Rachel. But I also need the diversion of not seeing my daughter sick so I can keep my sanity. I know that doesn't make any sense to you, but it is the truth." "Marilyn, it does make sense to me. I never told anyone here at the office, but I lost my father to cancer when I was a child, and I remember how it affected me and my mother. She had to do the same thing, work to keep her mind off it. I would spend all day playing outside, so I didn't have to see him wasting away in his bedroom. Funny thing is, I now realize he didn't resent me doing that. He didn't want me to see him in that shape either." John quietly said, "Marilyn, I know you internalize everything because I recognize you doing the same thing that I do. But it is okay to talk to someone. And if you ever need to talk to someone, give me a call. I'll help you in any way I can. Now what you need to do is go make things right with your husband. So, get out there and reprogram your project, and I'll get Terry and Frank to help you out. I'll help review the progress, and we will get this behind you, so you can go tend to your little girl. Is that a deal?" A relieved Marilyn stood up and smiled and said, "Thank you, John." As she walked out of his office, she thought how lucky she was to have such an understanding boss. Christmas came around and Rachel celebrated her 5th birthday. She was surrounded by all her family, parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins when the birthday cake was presented. She made her birthday wish after everyone sang happy birthday, and Marilyn had to help the weakened child blow out all the candles. When she was asked what she wished for, she responded that she wanted a white Christmas. No one tried to tell her how rare it was to get snow in their region of the country. They instead diverted her attention on the double load of gifts she got for her birthday and Christmas. Rachel spent the day ripping through presents as everyone owed and awed over them. Ray moved around stiffly trying to videotape the event. He still hadn't quite recovered from the bone marrow procedure. He thought back on the torture he underwent, and he knew that Rachel had been subjected to the same pain. He teared up from the memory, and it caused his eyes to blur through the viewfinder. He quickly handed the camera to Marilyn so he could recover. He ran his hand over the stubble of hair growing on his head. He and Marilyn were willing to remain bald for Rachel's sake, but she told them that she liked them better with hair. He looked at his wife and saw her hair was also beginning to grow back. It will take a while to get back to the length she preferred, he thought. Still, it would take a long time to approach the length when he first met her. God, I still remember that like it was yesterday, he thought, delving into the memories of his college years. He and some of his hometown buddies had banded together to lessen the stress of the startling transition to campus life at a large university. The funny thing was, he didn't particularly care for some of the guys in the group. It was just a safety in numbers thing. The gang, along with a few stray roommates tagging along, had decided to attend a freshman party. The more brazen of the guys quickly went solo into the target-rich environment of young, good-looking females who similarly had huddled together for mass protection. Ray watched enviously as more and more of the guys would see someone that struck their fancy and go make a move on them. Ray wasn't built that way. He knew if he went and tried to talk to a pretty girl out of the blue, he would stammer and babble and ultimately convince her that she was talking to a certified idiot. No, for Ray, it would require getting to know her and getting comfortable being around her. Then, he could let down his guard and begin to show his best attributes: compassion, consideration, empathy, humor, kindness, loyalty, and other qualities that weren't meant to be seen in a glib moment's glance. Still, as he watched guys getting shot down in flames, he wondered if he would ever find someone he was meant to be with. He noticed several of his buddies had gotten past the initial introduction stage and were having animated conversations with the clusters of girls, and fingers were pointed in the guys' directions and female eyes were gauging the various males. Ray realized that it was likely that he would be paired up to an equivalent wingman, or should that be wingwoman? And while his input would be considered, the collective consensus of the group would be the determining factor, at least for this initial meeting. Slowly, the converging groups of males and females merged by osmosis, and names and introductions were given in the den of the party. It was amusing to see the frantic looks of everyone's faces trying to match names to faces for the remainder of the evening. It was also clear to see which pairings were off to a good start, and those that were doomed from the beginning. Ray was lost in the swirl of the group when a girl he had been introduced to by his roommate collared him and said, "Ricky, I want you to meet someone." He couldn't remember the name of the girl either, but he felt irritated that she had forgotten his name, especially when she presumed to know him well enough to introduce him to someone. Simultaneously, as he was saying, "It's not Ricky, it's Ray," the benefactor was melding him close to someone and said, "Mary, meet Ricky." The unknown person was similarly frustrated as she said, "My name is Marilyn, not Mary." And in that convergence of time and space, Ray was stunned to see the dark-haired beauty as he offered his hand for an introduction. "My God, how did I not see her before?" he thought as he focused on her. She was roughly 5 feet, 10 inches, dressed in a simple floral print dress which still managed to show off her fantastic body. Her shoes were sandals, so as to not intimidate any males by wearing heels. Ray had the sudden realization that with heels on, he would be looking at this bewitching girl at eye level. Sea green eyes that threatened to unsettle him. Eyes that would take a lifetime to worship. As her warm, soft hand slid into his, she beamed a smile and she shook her head, sending the waves of long, silky, jet black hair away from her face as she said, "Hi Ray, it is nice to meet you." And in truth, it was nice for Marilyn to meet Ray. She had immediately regretted agreeing to come to the college mixer. "Come on, Mary, it will be fun," her roommate said. She was exasperated. For 3 days, she had shared a room with 3 other girls, and they still couldn't get her name right. But finally, they wore her down and she agreed to go, and it was just like high school. As soon as boys saw how tall she was, they veered away from her to keep from hurting their fragile egos. She had undergone a series of subtle rejections as boys would ask various girls around her to dance. Yet, ignore her. She knew, despite her height, she was attractive, and more important, she was smart and articulate. Yet, for all that, she wondered whether she would be seen as an object of ridicule in college as she had been in high school. She knew none of the other girls ever had to spend their high school weekends dateless. She knew none of them were so desperate to go to the prom that they accepted the only invitation offered. She knew that none of them went with the shortest boy in their class, which caused her classmates to snicker when they posed for the prom picture. She knew none of them were dumped by their prom date once the wager was won by her date for taking her out to the prom. She still had the image of the runt walking through the crowd, waving the dollar bills victoriously over his head to the shouts and accolades of his buddies. She thought college would be a fresh start, and so she opted to go cross-country to go to school to get away from her past. But apparently that wasn't enough. Boys were not going to give her a chance at college either. She thought when her roommate incorrectly introduced her to another boy that was sure to flee at the first chance. Then came the pleasant surprise of seeing a very attractive guy looking at her with interest. She smiled as he stammered his name to her, and she corrected her roommate's mistake and told him her name. Instead of immediately commenting on what the weather was like up there, or some other infantile height joke, Ray began asking her the obvious questions. Where was she from? What was she majoring in? How did she like school? But after satisfying those questions, he continued to stare at her with those green eyes lasered in on her with rapt attention. She realized that he was desperate to keep the conversation going with her. This was an unexplored sensation for Marilyn, and she reveled in his attention. She could tell Ray was frustrated having to engage in a conversation while competing with the excessive noise level at the party. He leaned into her and said, "Would you like to go to Sally's and get a cup of coffee?" She smiled and immediately agreed. They walked out of the chaotic event and began talking in normal tones as they walked to the nearby coffee shop. They walked at an easy pace and topics of conversation segued as they entered the shop. Ray automatically held her chair as Marilyn sat down. It never dawned on him to worry that Marilyn would think of him as a chauvinist. And Marilyn never felt that Ray was treating her as a second-class citizen while they continued to talk. The truth was they instinctively felt comfortable around one another. The waitress that served them would have sworn the couple were in a long-term relationship rather than just meeting one another an hour ago. Smiles and laughter were present the entire time as they continued to ignore the other customers until they were informed it was closing time. As Ray walked Marilyn back to her dorm, he saw her shiver slightly in the chill of the night. He quickly took off his jacket and draped it around her. Marilyn relished her first time to wear a boy's jacket. She had to endure too often watching the girls in high school wearing their boyfriend's letter jacket as a claim and commitment. Now she was hoping that she was being claimed. A moment of panic seized her. Oh my God, am I imagining things? Maybe I need to slow down before I run him off for me, she thought. But the ever-present look of interest in Ray's eyes as they walked in the gleam of the night lights assuaged her concerns as she cradled herself into the warmth of his jacket. Ray was oblivious to the cold. His primary focus was studying the bewitching figure walking alongside him. All too soon, they had arrived at the dorm building where they finished their conversation, and for a brief moment, both hesitated as they grasped for a solution to end the night. Ray desperately wanted to kiss her, but wasn't sure how Marilyn would react. His focus was to ensure that Marilyn would be receptive to seeing him again. He knew he had to see her again. Marilyn tentatively held her hand out, but she was hoping for so much more as she searched his eyes. Ray gripped the offered hand, and in the scant seconds where they uncharacteristically fell silent, they both subtly moved toward each other and gave a soft, light kiss to end the night. As Ray watched Marilyn disappear into the building, he was aware that he was already yearning to see her again. Marilyn walked into her dorm room where her anxious roommates were waiting. Marilyn, where have you been? You disappeared from us without telling us where you were going." Good, Marilyn thought. They were finally recognizing her name as she reluctantly shed herself out of Ray's jacket. She smiled and held the jacket and sniffed the scent. "Where did you get that?" asked one of her roommates. She beamed at them and said, "I got this from the man I'm going to marry." Across the quad in Ray's room, he was undergoing a similar interrogation. "Damn, Ray, 1 minute you were there, and the next time I looked up you were gone. Where the hell did you go?" Ray could only grin as the questions from his roommates escalated from their curiosity. As guys are wont to do, the questions soon devolved from curiosity to ribald to downright crude. "Ray, if you got a piece of that tall girl's bum you were with, I hope you broke her in for me, even if I will have to get a stepladder to screw her," joshed Henry. "Yeah, Ray, I would love to play Periscope with those jugs." Adam laughed as his hands pantomimed, peering closely into the large jugs of an imaginary girl. The room broke up into laughter until everyone came to the uncomfortable realization that Ray was not amused. As the laughter finally died off into uneasy silence, Ray spoke. "Henry, you and Adam have been my buddies since elementary school. If you want to stay that way, then never say another disparaging word about Marilyn, or I'll kick your asses." The icy calm which Ray quietly employed the threat brought home the realization that a line had been drawn and Ray would tolerate no trespass. Uneasily, the boys drifted off to bed. Ray remained awake late in the night, bringing up images of Marilyn. The next day in class, Ray was lost at sea as he ambled from one lecture to another. Thank God, none of the professors called on him. There was no telling what answer would have came from his befuddled brain. Mercifully, the afternoon ended and Ray found himself at the students' commons sitting at an empty table. His cell phone was being toyed in his hand as he debated what to do. Even though he didn't have that much practice with relations with girls, he knew the rule was you wait 3 days before calling them. He never questioned why it was a 3-day period. He supposed it allowed both parties to engage at a neutral level. What if I call Marilyn? Would it scare her off? Would she be happy to hear from me? I need a reason to call. How do I explain why I am calling? Those thoughts and others flooded into Ray's analysis as he swayed from fear to desire. He thought, why is it so damn tough to do this? He wondered as his hand finally found the nerve to dial Marilyn's number. Marilyn was studying in her room. Well, she was trying to study in her room. All day long, her thoughts were of the wonderful evening she had spent with Ray. She had gone to bed clutching his jacket and drifted to sleep, comfortable in the subtle security of his scent on the leather. What possessed me to tell those girls I found the man I was going to marry? She fretted. It was only one meeting, just a cup of coffee. How did I build this up? Am I that damn desperate? Hell, I probably scared him so bad that he still hasn't stopped running. But then, there was that kiss. That wonderful, gentle spark of connection. That instinctive desire to continue. God, he had to feel it as well, Marilyn thought as she tried to concentrate on her English lit assignment. Suddenly, her phone started chirping. Strange, it wasn't time for her weekly check-in with her parents. She wasn't expecting a call from her roommates since they were down the hall visiting some other girls. Hello, she inquired. Ray was instantly transfixed by the voice, as he mentally drew up an image of Marilyn to go along with the voice. In a panic, he realized he forgot the preconceived dialogue he intended to use. Hi Marilyn, it's Ray Thompson. From last night, we had coffee. Ray cringed as he castigated himself. Idiot, how many Rays did she have coffee with last night? Still, he forced himself to stumble forward. I was calling to see if you'd like to go get another cup of coffee? Marilyn had started smiling once she heard his voice, and it became bigger after Ray asked his invitation. Ray, I'd love to. Can I meet you back where we were last night in about half an hour? That would be great, Marilyn. I'll go grab us a table. See you in a while. Her dread from reading Chaucer evaporated as she said goodbye and prepared to go out. What a strange sensation to get made up for a boy. She soon had bounded out of the building and walked briskly to Sally's. When she arrived, she peered into the crowd and spotted Ray as he rose up. As Marilyn approached, Ray noticed that she wore his jacket again. Man, it looked so much better on her than it ever did me, he thought as he continued to follow her progress to the table. As they smiled at each other and said hi to one another, the fear slipped away and they relaxed into easy conversation again. They had remained till closing time and Ray walked her across campus again. When poised at her dorm's entrance, Marilyn began to shed off Ray's jacket. Ray told her to keep it since they had a study date at Sally's scheduled tomorrow, so he could help her understand Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. They would probably be there till closing again. This time there was less hesitation as they moved together for a goodnight kiss. As they meshed, Marilyn greedily snatched a second kiss and reluctantly said goodnight. Ray walked in solitude, trying to cope with his feelings while savoring the taste of Marilyn's lipstick. The study date led to another the next day and then another. On Friday evening, Marilyn and Ray attended a symposium on film noir and shared popcorn as they watched Humphrey Bogart solve the crime and win the heart of Lauren Bacall. Saturday, they attended the university's football game. The dismal failure of the team couldn't dampen the enthusiasm both felt being around each other. Sunday, they agreed to go on a picnic in the attendance of several of their friends. The next week was filled with study dates, and the weekend allowed them time to enjoy each other's company on dates. So it went for the next months as Marilyn and Ray quietly became the core of their group of friends. They had not campaigned for that. It was just a natural reaction that they gave a stability to their group. Ray and Marilyn could only smile and laugh as their satellite of friends' dating adventures would be analyzed and discussed. No one needed to bring up Marilyn's and Ray's situation. That had been cemented by their 6th Friday night date. When Ray told her that all his roommates were gone for the weekend to follow the football team on an away game, Marilyn suggested they take advantage of the situation. Are you sure about this, Marilyn? Ray asked as they stared at one another in the quiet dorm room. The significance of the portending event was overwhelming. Marilyn nervously was almost ready to rescind her offer when Ray continued to speak. I want to let you know that I have never done this before. I know how from listening to other guys talking, but I need this to be perfect for you, Marilyn. I love you, Marilyn. I've been in love with you from the first time I saw you, and I'll always be in love with you. Whether you decide yes or no, I'll still love you and want you forever." The sincerity of Ray's expression was all that was needed to melt the lingering doubts from Marilyn. She had listened to so many horror stories from her roommates about guys professing their love, and once they got a piece of bum, dumping them. Marilyn was resolved that would never happen to her. Now, her boyfriend had not only said the L word first, but he was giving her an out. All she had to do was back down, and life would continue as it had. Suddenly, Marilyn knew what she wanted. She didn't want to look back later in life and see this as a what-if moment. Ray announced his commitment to her, and she had felt the same for him. It was time. She leaned forward and softly kissed him and began to undress. Ray nervously watched for a few seconds and then clumsily began to shed his clothes. When they were stripped to their underwear, Marilyn crawled into the small bed. Ray turned out the light and followed Marilyn. Kissing and blindly groping one another escalated the passion. Soon the underwear was discarded as the fire continued to grow. Blindly on top of Marilyn, Ray moved into position. He reached down, desperately hoping to find his way into Marilyn. Marilyn wondered if she should guide him. Her gasp gave proof to Ray that finally he was doing something right. Marilyn realized that her virginity was gone. Ray was continuing to whisper his love for her as her tears stopped from falling unnoticed by Ray. Finally, he was finding out what this mystery was about. Due to his excitement, he couldn't last long. A mere 5 minutes, and he was climaxing. Then it was a matter of declaring his love to Marilyn over and over in the darkness. Thanks to the gift of youth, Ray was able to do it 3 more times during the night, and Marilyn accommodated his needs. When the sun rose, Ray was softly caressing Marilyn as she slumbered. When she woke, the smile on her face rewarded Ray and alleviated his concerns. After that weekend, Ray and Marilyn's priority were to one another as they fleshed out their relationship. What puzzled their friends was the couple were not cookie-cutting identical twins. They argued politics, they debated art, they had different musical tastes. One friend summed it up best: "The only thing the two of you have in common is each other." That was enough. Ray invited Marilyn to go home with him during the Thanksgiving break and endured all the jibes at his expense as Marilyn charmed his family. At Christmas, he flew out with Marilyn to her parents' house and endured their inspection. They continued to alternate holidays and breaks throughout their college careers and were welcomed fixtures in both households. It was no surprise that after graduation, Ray asked Marilyn to wait on him as he entered law school. She followed him and moved in with him as Ray delved into the Socratic legal education. When he passed the bar, both families were joined in a celebration party when he went down on one knee to ask her to marry him. Marilyn's father smiled at his daughter's excited acceptance. While he was old-fashioned enough not to be 100% on board when his daughter began living with Ray, Ray still respected him enough to ask for her hand in marriage before he proposed. His daughter could have done a lot worse. "For better or worse, that is what I vowed when I married Ray," Marilyn thought as they waited for another stoplight. "I was so ready to accept the better, but when it came time for the worst, I certainly showed my true colors. Well, it is too late to turn back the clock," she thought miserably. "I lost him and I have nobody to blame but myself." The funny thing is I never saw it coming. First came the little pep talks in John's office. Then it escalated to going out to lunch with him. Then, every now and then they would go have an after-work drink. Oh, it was all innocuous. Other people were included on most of the get-togethers, and John never tried to say or do anything in private. He still remained as a sounding board while I vented. He never tried to belittle Ray while I vented my pain and frustration over Rachel. He always gave me good advice to keep communicating with Ray. But that was easier said than done as time went on. Then came that lunch where it was just the two of us. I was having a particular bad day and was close to losing it. John took me to a quiet restaurant and sat and listened while I vented for an entire afternoon. He reached and held my hand as I explained the pain I was undergoing. When it came time to leave, he gave me a hug as a sign of empathy before I drove home. I was happy that I had a friend I could talk to. Marilyn got home and steeled herself to start caring for Rachel. Ray and she were in agreement that Rachel came first. Whatever else was bothering them would end when they set foot in the house. They would tend and care for their daughter and deal with the minor stuff later. That night, Ray didn't come home till midnight. She began worrying after it got to 7 p.m. It was his practice that he would call if he was working late. When Rachel asked where her daddy was, she told her daughter he was working late, but he would look in on her after she went asleep. She began calling him, and the phone went to voicemail. She kept leaving messages, but she didn't get a call back. When he arrived home from his taxi ride, Marilyn was seething. His suit was disheveled, and he was reeking of whiskey. She started to light in on him, all the while trying to keep the noise level down not to disturb Rachel's sleep. He tried to stand erect, but the liquor was making that impossible when he point-blank asked if she was having an affair with John Toulos. Without waiting for an answer, he staggered upstairs and spent a moment just watching Rachel sleep. Then he went to the guest bedroom and shut the door behind him. The next morning, Marilyn was busy preparing breakfast when a hungover Ray stumbled into the kitchen. By way of greeting him, she dropped his plate of food haphazardly in front of him. When he realized that no fork, knife, or spoon would be forthcoming, not to mention a cup of coffee, he sighed and got up to tend to those matters. Finally, as he sat down, he watched as Marilyn made no sign of noticing him as she furiously chewed her food. She wolfed down her breakfast and got up and noisily dropped her plate into the sink. Then she began to walk out of the kitchen. Right when she got to the doorway, she spun around and said, "You want to tell me what the hell brought that on?" Ray wasn't sure if the accusatory treatment was any better than the silent treatment. Still, he replied, "Yesterday, while you were getting all comfy with your boss at lunch, one of the senior partners at the firm spotted the two of you. He thought I would like to see what my wife was up to. Imagine my surprise when I saw my wife holding hands with another man on the photos he took with his smartphone. Not to mention the really good shot of the two of you hugging. Yeah, that really made my day." Dropping the sarcasm, Ray continued, "It was bad enough knowing that the jackass would take the photos to every single partner in the firm and use it as ammo to keep me from being made partner.